Cale had been on this strange world for 3 months now, stranded after his ship was pulled off course by a cosmic anomaly. At first, the isolation had been unbearable, the days stretching endlessly with no sign of rescue. He had learned to survive, to find food, and repair what he could on his damaged ship, but every night the loneliness weighed heavier than ever. It was on one of those long, silent nights that he first saw her. He was sitting outside his ship, trying to calm his nerves after yet another long day of fruitless repairs. The skies were dark and dotted with unfamiliar constellations. He pulled his jacket tighter against the cold wind as he looked up, wondering if he'd ever see Earth again. That's when he noticed movement in the shadows. A figure was standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the ship's faint light. She was tall, her shape sleek and graceful, with skin the color of moonlight, and her hair, or what he assumed was hair, shimmered like the night sky itself. Her eyes were the most haunting part. They were glowing softly, amber like distant stars, but they were filled with something that seemed both curious and sorrowful. Cale couldn't breathe. His heart raced, his instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet remained frozen to the spot. She was no threat, he could tell. She wasn't approaching. She was just watching. He found himself standing up slowly, his voice almost a whisper as he spoke into the cold air. "Are you real?" The figure didn't move. She didn't answer, but her gaze seemed to pierce right through him, like she was seeing past his skin into something deeper. Cale's hand instinctively went to his throat, a nervous tic that he didn't know he had. He cleared his throat and repeated, "Are you real?" Still no response, but he could feel her presence like a weight in the air. He took a cautious step forward, and that was when she moved. Not aggressively, but with a fluidity that made her look like she belonged to the shadows themselves. In an instant, she was no longer just standing at the edge of the clearing. She was closer, too close for comfort, yet there was no fear in her eyes, only that quiet sadness. Cale couldn't help himself. He found himself whispering, "You're beautiful." The words escaped before he could stop them. The silence between them thickened, and he waited, holding his breath. The woman, the alien, didn't speak at first. Her eyes, glowing softly in the dim light, flickered as if trying to make sense of his words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke in a voice that was soft but heavy, like a wind brushing against the leaves. Truly, or just a human trick? Cale's heart skipped a beat, and he felt something stir within him that was both foreign and familiar. Her voice wasn't hostile. It wasn't even dismissive. It was curious and perhaps a little broken. Her words felt like a question not just about his compliment, but about everything she had ever known. He hesitated, unsure of what to say. "Truly," he said, his voice a little more confident now, though his chest tightened with the weight of the moment. "I've never seen anything more beautiful." Her golden eyes flickered, almost as if in disbelief. She stepped closer, her movements slow, deliberate, as if she was testing the air between them. And for a moment, Cale swore he could see the smallest hint of a smile tug at the corners of her lips. But then the moment passed. Her expression turned somber again, and she took a step back, as if she were pulling herself away from something fragile, something she was afraid to touch. "Why do you say that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper now, as if she was afraid to break the silence. Cale felt his heart ache as he realized how alone she must have been, how alone they both were, strangers in a foreign world. "Because, even if you don't believe it, you are, maybe, especially because you're so different. I don't know," he admitted, his voice faltering. "But I know it's true." Her gaze softened for a moment, and Cale saw something in her eyes, something that made his breath catch. It was a mix of sadness, longing, and maybe hope. She looked away, her gaze now drifting toward the distant horizon. "I don't belong here," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I was never meant to be seen. I was never meant to feel this." The weight of her words hit Cale like a physical blow. He stepped closer, unable to resist the pull. "I don't think anyone is meant to be alone," he said, his voice raw. "Not really." She turned to him again, her eyes now filled with a depth that left him speechless. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she simply stepped back slowly, as if retreating into the night was easier than staying. And just before she disappeared into the shadows, she gave him one last look, one that seemed to say everything and nothing at all. Cale stood there for a long time, the cold night settling in around him, his heart aching for the connection they had almost made. She had come to him like a dream, unreachable, untouchable, but in that one moment, he had felt closer to her than to anything he had ever known. And yet she had pulled away. He didn't understand it, Didn't know why she had come or why she had left so quickly, but one thing was certain: he would never forget her. The silence returned, and Kale stood alone in the dark, whispering to the night, "You're beautiful." But this time, he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her, or to the emptiness that had swallowed her whole. Days passed, but the memory of the mysterious woman lingered in Kale's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than just the creature he had seen outside his ship. Something about the way she had looked at him, the weight of her words, they had left an imprint on his heart, a mark he couldn't ignore. Despite his best efforts to move on, Kale found himself looking out into the night sky every evening, waiting for her. He would sit by his ship, his hands resting on his knees, watching the stars. He wasn't expecting her to come, not really. But the feeling of longing was there, a quiet ache that gnawed at him, pulling him toward the unknown. And then one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of deep blue and gold, he saw her again. She was standing in the same place, just at the edge of the clearing, her form bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Kale's heart jumped in his chest, and without thinking he stood up, walking toward her. This time she didn't retreat into the shadows. She stayed, waiting for him. Her golden eyes locked onto his, the same intensity in her gaze as before, but this time there was something else, something vulnerable, something yearning that Kale had never seen before. The distance between them felt smaller than it had the first time. She wasn't just watching him now, she was feeling him, and he could sense it. "I thought you might come back," Kale said, his voice softer than usual, almost like a secret shared between them. He didn't know why he said it, but it felt true. It felt like he had been waiting for this moment his whole life, even though he had never known it until now. The woman, her features soft yet still untamed, stepped closer, her feet light against the soft earth. There was no hesitation this time. She reached out, and Kale's breath caught in his throat as her hand gently brushed his arm. It wasn't a forceful touch, but it was something more, an invitation, a question, a plea. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she studied him with the same penetrating gaze, as though trying to figure out if he meant what he had said. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, she spoke, her voice low and uncertain. "Why do you look at me like that?" Kale blinked, his heart racing as he searched for the right words. Because I see you. I see you in a way that no one else ever has, and it scares me." He paused, his breath shaky. "But it's also beautiful, you're beautiful." Her eyes softened at the word, but her expression was still filled with doubt. "Beautiful," she repeated, almost as if tasting the word. She stepped closer again, and Kale felt the air around them grow heavier, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. "You don't know me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You only see what you want to see. I'm not who you think I am." Kale shook his head, not fully understanding but feeling something pull him deeper. "I don't know who you are," he admitted, "but I don't need to. What matters is what I see in you now." Her gaze shifted, and for a moment Kale wondered if she was considering leaving again. But then a flicker of something passed through her eyes. Was it hope? Was it fear? He couldn't tell, but it made his heart beat faster. "I don't belong here," she whispered, almost to herself. "I don't belong anywhere. I was born into a world of isolation, forced to live alone, to watch, to never truly live. I am only a shadow." Kale felt a pang in his chest, and before he could stop himself, he reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. The warmth of her skin felt like a lifeline. "You're not a shadow," he said firmly, the words tasting sweeter as they left his lips. "You're alive, you're real, and I see you. You're not just a creature, you're more." She flinched slightly at his touch, but didn't pull away. Her eyes locked onto his, searching him for something, truth, maybe. It felt like she was weighing him, testing if his words were genuine. "You speak of things you do not understand, human," she murmured, her voice tinged with both sadness and longing. Kale's heart twisted in his chest, and he stepped closer, his hand still gently holding her cheek. "Maybe I don't understand everything, but I want to understand you." For the longest time she said nothing, but Kale could see the struggle in her eyes. There was so much fear, so much pain hidden beneath her hardened exterior, but also a fragile, flickering hope. A hope she was unwilling to trust. Finally she spoke, her voice a soft murmur. "You say I'm beautiful, but I am afraid. Afraid of what you will see when the truth comes out. Afraid that you will turn away from me when you understand who I really am." Kale felt his chest tighten at her words, the weight of her vulnerability pressing down on him. He gently cupped her face with both hands, pulling her closer, his forehead touching hers. "I don't care about the truth that scares you," he said, his voice steady and filled with quiet determination. I only care about what I see now, and what I see is someone I want to be with, someone I want to understand. No matter what you think of yourself, I'm not turning away." She closed her eyes, letting out a soft breath, and Kale could feel the tension in her body begin to melt. But she still pulled away, taking a small step back, her eyes filled with sadness. "You don't know what you're asking, human," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I cannot let you get too close. I am not what you think I am. I'm too broken for this. For us." Kale reached out, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I am sorry," she said, her voice low, filled with something that sounded almost like regret. "But I cannot stay." Kale felt the sting of her words deep in his chest. He wanted to argue, to say something that would convince her to stay, but the truth was, he knew she was right. She was afraid of being hurt again, afraid of the deep scars that ran through her heart. And no matter how much he wanted to bridge that gap, he couldn't force her to see the possibility of them. "Then this is goodbye," Kale whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She looked at him one last time, her eyes glimmering with something he couldn't quite place. "Goodbye, human, and thank you for seeing me." And with that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Kale standing alone in the cold night. He whispered into the dark, the weight of everything heavy on his chest, "I'll always see you." And though she was gone, he could still feel her presence in his heart. Kale woke up to an empty morning. The space beside him was cold, and the quiet of the world outside was deafening. She hadn't returned. After the brief encounter with her, he had hoped that the fleeting moment between them, those words, that touch, would lead to something more. But now, after 2 days of silence, he was left to wonder if he had imagined it all. The nights had felt endless without her. He tried to keep busy, working on his ship, exploring the planet's strange terrain, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness that had settled in his chest. Every part of him longed for her, even though he knew she was likely out of reach. After all, she had made it clear that she could never be a part of his world. She had pushed him away, and that hurt more than Kale was willing to admit. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she looked at him, the softness in her eyes that had never quite left, even when she tried to hide it. He had told her that he saw her, that he truly saw her, but it felt like those words were as fragile as glass. Could she ever really believe that? Could she ever believe that someone like him could love someone like her? Kale was lost in his thoughts when late one evening he heard something that brought him out of his reverie. It was the rustle of leaves, a sound he knew all too well. She was back. His heart leaped in his chest as he looked up, standing quickly to see her emerge from the shadows once more. She was as beautiful as he remembered, though this time there was a palpable distance in the air. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed with something deeper than before. She stopped just at the edge of the clearing, her posture cautious, almost as if she was afraid to come closer. Kale's heart sank, but he walked toward her anyway, not caring about the space between them. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the longing he had been carrying for days. "I've missed you." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she just stood there, her gaze searching his face as if weighing something heavy. Finally, after a long silence, she spoke, her voice quiet and strained. "You don't understand," she said. "You don't understand what you're asking for." Kale stopped a few feet from her, his heart aching with the uncertainty in her words. "I don't need to understand everything," he said, his voice firm. "I only know that I want to be with you. Whatever you are, wherever you come from, I see you, and I can't pretend that I don't feel something when I look at you." She took a slow step back, her golden eyes flickering with hesitation. "You think you know me," she said, shaking her head. "But you don't know what it's like to be me, to be this." Kale's chest tightened, but he stepped forward, reaching out a hand toward her. "Then teach me," he said, his voice gentle but full of hope. "Let me understand you. Let me be the one who knows the real you, the one you're hiding." Her eyes darkened, and for a moment Kale thought she might turn and walk away again. But instead, she spoke in a low whisper, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "I am broken, Kale. I was created to be something I was never meant to be. I was made to survive, to endure, but I wasn't made to love. I wasn't made to let anyone in, and I'm scared that if I do, I'll destroy everything. I'll destroy you." Kale's hand lowered, but he took a step closer, his heart in his throat. "You won't destroy me," he said, his voice firm but tender. "You're not broken, you're just afraid of what could happen if you let someone else see the real you." She turned her face away, the rawness in her expression more than Kale could bear. "You think love can fix things?" she whispered. "You think it's that simple? Love isn't enough. It never is." "I don't know if love can fix everything," Kale replied, his heart pounding. But I do know that it can make the hurt bearable. It can give you something to hold on to when everything else seems impossible. And I know that I would never let you go." For a long moment there was silence between them. The stars above seemed to watch, the quiet of the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Cale stood there waiting, his breath caught in his chest. Finally, the woman, his mysterious, beautiful alien, spoke again, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand the kind of damage that's been done to me. I can't allow myself to fall into something I can't control. It would break me. It would break both of us." Her words cut deep, and Cale felt an ache settle in his chest. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that they could figure it out together, that they could learn to trust each other, but the truth was, he knew she wasn't wrong. The weight of her pain was something he could never fully understand. But that didn't stop him from wanting to be there for her, from wanting to be the one who would never leave her, no matter how broken she thought she was. "You don't have to be afraid of me," Cale said softly, taking another step toward her. "You don't have to push me away. If you need time, I'll give it to you. If you need space, I'll give that too, but please don't leave, please don't pull away again." For a moment, Cale saw her struggle with the decision. Her eyes were filled with so much conflict, so much fear. And in that moment, Cale realized that he had fallen for her in ways he never thought possible. He didn't know what her past held or why she was so afraid to let him in. But he knew this, she was everything to him, and he would not give up on her. Slowly, she took a step toward him, her expression softer, though still filled with hesitation. "I'm not ready," she whispered, "but I'm here." Cale's heart surged in his chest. She wasn't ready, but she hadn't turned away, and that in that moment was enough. He reached for her, his hand trembling as he gently cupped her cheek, pulling her close, not forcing, just giving her space to decide. And as he looked into her golden eyes, he whispered, "Then we'll take it one step at a time." And for the first time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, her forehead resting against his, and for a fleeting moment, they were no longer two strangers on different paths. They were just two people together, holding on to each other in the vastness of the universe. Cale spent the next few days in a haze, his mind constantly replaying the words they had shared. The night she had returned to him, the distance between them still raw but not as unbearable, had left him filled with a bittersweet hope. He wasn't sure if she fully trusted him yet, but she hadn't left. That alone was more than he could have asked for. They still didn't speak of the things they were both afraid to confront. She came to him every evening, but always with caution, as if testing the waters, as if unsure whether the pull between them was something she could allow herself to feel. Her golden eyes were filled with so much depth, so much emotion, but she hid them behind the veil of her silence. Cale knew she was battling something much deeper than he could understand. One evening he sat outside his ship, staring up at the stars. The sky above seemed endless, and for the first time he truly felt the weight of it. He had always been told that the universe was vast, but now it felt as though the weight of all those stars, all that empty space, was pressing down on him. He was far from home, stranded on a strange world, but it was more than just the physical distance that gnawed at him. It was the emotional distance between him and the woman he had come to care for more than he had ever expected. He missed her when she wasn't there. But even more than that, he longed for the connection that they both knew they needed, but neither had the courage to fully embrace. As he sat lost in his thoughts, he heard the familiar rustling of leaves. His heart jumped, and he looked up to see her standing at the edge of the clearing. This time she wasn't hesitant. She walked toward him, her movements graceful, almost effortless. Her eyes, though guarded, seemed to hold something new, a quiet sadness, but also a flicker of something else. Maybe hope, or maybe fear. Cale's heart ached as she stopped in front of him, just out of reach. He stood up slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might send her away. "I didn't expect you tonight," he said, his voice hoarse with the weight of everything unsaid between them. She didn't respond immediately. She only looked at him, her gaze searching, as though trying to decide if this moment, this fragile, fleeting moment, was something she could trust. And then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of you," she confessed, her words breaking the silence like glass shattering. The vulnerability in her tone caught him off guard. Cale's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" he asked, stepping closer but still giving her the space she needed. "I'm afraid that if I let myself feel something for you, I'll lose control," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've lived for so long watching from the shadows, never allowing myself to get close to anyone, but you make me feel things I thought I couldn't feel. I'm afraid of that." Her words hung in the air between them, raw and exposed. Kale's heart swelled with both pain and understanding. He knew what it felt like to be afraid of letting someone in, to be terrified of losing control. But he also knew that sometimes, letting someone in was the only way to heal. He stepped closer, his heart beating faster, and reached out to her. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said softly, his voice full of quiet conviction. "I won't hurt you, I just want to be here, with you." She closed her eyes for a moment, as though fighting a battle inside herself. When she opened them again, there was something different in her gaze. The walls she had built around herself were still there, but they were crumbling just a little. She reached out, slowly, tentatively, and Kale's heart raced as her fingers brushed against his. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I don't know if I can let go of my fear." Kale gently cupped her hand, guiding it to his chest over the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You don't have to let go of everything," he said quietly. "You just have to let me in. Let me show you that it's okay to trust, that it's okay to feel." For a long time they stood there in silence, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Kale could feel the weight of her uncertainty, but also something else. A shift, a change, something deeper than either of them had expected. She wasn't ready to let go of her past, and Kale knew that. But in that moment they were closer than they had ever been, and that was enough. "I'm here," Kale whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, her golden eyes filled with a raw emotion that he could see but didn't fully understand. And for the first time, she stepped closer to him, allowing the distance between them to close just a little more. Her head leaned against his chest, and Kale's arms wrapped around her, holding her gently but firmly, offering the comfort she had never allowed herself to accept. They stood there for a long time in the quiet of the night, holding each other without words. Kale didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if she would ever fully let him in or if she would pull away again. But he knew this. This moment, this fragile connection, was something neither of them could ever forget. Even if they couldn't stay in this moment forever, it would always be a part of them. As the night stretched on, Kale whispered softly into her hair, "I'll be here when you're ready." And for the first time, she didn't pull away. She let herself be held, knowing that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be afraid anymore. The days that followed were quiet, but they weren't the same kind of silence Kale had grown accustomed to in his isolation. It wasn't filled with the sharp sting of loneliness, nor was it a silence filled with dread. This was different. This was the kind of silence that felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something that neither Kale nor she could name. Every evening they met, she would appear from the shadows of the forest, and Kale would be there, waiting. There was still some distance between them, an invisible wall neither of them dared to push through. The night would pass with them sitting beside each other, saying little, but the unspoken words were always there. They sat close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, but just far enough to keep the lingering fear at bay. They were still strangers, even though they were. One evening, as the sky began to turn deep blue and the stars started to twinkle, Kale found himself looking at her, lost in the way the moonlight danced in her eyes. The air between them felt different tonight, thicker, heavier with something unsaid. Her face was still that of the creature who had stolen his heart from the very first moment he saw her, but tonight there was a tenderness there that hadn't been before. "You're still afraid," Kale said softly, almost to himself, his eyes tracing the curves of her face. It wasn't a question, it was a truth he had come to understand over the last few weeks. She wasn't afraid of him, she was afraid of herself, afraid of the feeling he had sparked in her. She turned her gaze toward him, her golden eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and longing. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was made to be alone, Kale. I was built for survival, not for love. I wasn't meant to be touched, to be held. I don't even know how to." Kale reached out, gently placing a hand over hers, silencing the words she couldn't finish. "I don't need you to know how," he said softly. "I just need you to be here, to be with me." Her breath caught in her throat, and she pulled her hand away, her gaze darting to the ground. "But I can't, not like this. I don't know how to be what you want me to be." Kale's chest tightened with the weight of her words. He had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that the walls she had built around herself would come down eventually. But he was starting to realize that this wasn't something that could be rushed. She had been alone for so long, and love, true love, was something she had never been allowed to believe in. How could he ask her to give that up now? "I don't want you to be anything but yourself," Kale said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want you to change for me. I just want you to be here, to be with me however that looks." She looked at him, her golden eyes softening just a little. But even with the softness, Kale could see the conflict there. It was the kind of conflict that burned deep, deep enough to make her retreat, to make her run away from everything she wanted. She was too afraid of being hurt, too afraid of feeling something she couldn't control. "How can I be with you?" she asked, her voice breaking, "when I'm afraid of breaking you?" Kale's heart ached. She had already done so much to keep herself distant, and yet he knew she was just protecting herself. She wasn't used to love, to softness, to someone wanting to hold her close. He could see that now. "You won't break me," Kale said, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't break me. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She turned away, her face hidden from him. Kale could see her shoulders shaking ever so slightly, though she tried to hide it. He wanted to reach out to hold her, but he knew that wouldn't fix anything. She needed to come to him in her own time, at her own pace. He couldn't force her to let go of her fear. It wasn't that simple. "I'm afraid of what happens when you see me for who I really am," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid of what you'll do when you realize that I'm not someone who can love like you do. I've never known that. I don't know how to trust." Kale's chest tightened. He understood now. This wasn't just fear of the unknown, fear of him. It was fear of herself. She was terrified that she wasn't capable of giving him what he needed, what they both needed. And the truth was, she wasn't wrong. She had spent so long hiding herself, becoming someone who could only survive, never someone who could truly live. "You don't have to know how to love, not yet," Kale said, his voice soft, barely above a whisper. "You just need to let me show you, one step at a time." She turned to face him then, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for any hint of deception. But Kale's gaze was steady, full of the truth he had always known. He loved her even if she couldn't love him back in the way he wanted. He didn't need her to be perfect. He just needed her to be here with him in this moment. She stepped closer to him then, her eyes filled with that same raw emotion she had been hiding for so long. For a moment, Kale thought she was going to pull away again, retreat into the shadows like she always did. But this time, she didn't. Instead, she reached out, hesitantly, her hand brushing against his. And for the first time, she didn't pull back. "Can we try?" she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with the weight of everything she had been holding back. "Can we try even if it's just for now?" Kale's heart soared. "Yes," he said, his voice full of emotion. "We can try, and I'll be here every step of the way." She nodded, a tear slipping from her eye as she finally allowed herself to feel the connection between them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything he had hoped for, but it was enough. It was a beginning. In that moment, Kale knew that this quiet, fragile connection was worth everything. And whatever the future held, he would face it with her by his side. The days after their quiet promise felt like a fragile dream, one that Kale wasn't sure he deserved, but one he clung to all the same. Every evening they spent time together, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. She had come closer, step by hesitant step, and he could feel the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. But no matter how close they got, there was always something in her eyes, something distant, something painful that Kale knew she wasn't ready to share. She was here with him, but a part of her was still far away. He could feel it in the way her gaze would drift to the horizon when the quiet became too much, as if she were looking for something. Perhaps an escape, perhaps something she could never have. On one of those nights, Kale sat on the edge of the ship, his back against the cool metal, watching the stars above. He could hear her footsteps before he saw her, a soft rustling in the grass as she made her way toward him. Her presence was familiar now, something he couldn't imagine living without. He turned to her with a soft smile, his eyes searching her face for any sign of the peace he had been hoping for. But tonight, there was a tension in the air that Kale couldn't ignore. She was more withdrawn than usual, her posture stiff, her eyes distant. "Hey," he said gently, his voice full of quiet concern. "Are you all right?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she sat down beside him, keeping a careful distance. She looked up at the sky, her eyes lingering on the stars, but Kale could see the unease in her expression. "I'm not like you, Kale," she said finally, her voice soft but heavy with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "I don't belong here, not with you." Kale's heart skipped. The words stung, and for a moment he was silent, trying to process what she had said. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice a little tighter than he intended. "I mean," she trailed off, shaking her head as though trying to make sense of something. "You see me, you see something in me that I don't know how to give back. I don't know how to be the person you think I am. I'm too broken for that." Kale's chest tightened at her words, but he reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. "You're not broken," he said, his voice tender but firm. "You've been through things I can't even begin to understand, but you're not broken. You're still here, still fighting, still living, and that means something." She turned her head to look at him, her golden eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. "But I can't stay here, Kale. I can't keep pretending that I can just fit into this world, into your world. I'm not someone who belongs in your life. I was never meant for this." Kale felt the sting of her words, but he refused to pull his hand away. "I don't care about the world you think you don't belong in," he said quietly. "I care about you. All I want is for you to be with me, to be yourself, however that is. I don't need you to be anything else." She looked down at their joined hands, her expression softening for a moment before she pulled away. "I'm afraid of what will happen to you when you see what I really am," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm afraid of what will happen when you realize that I can't be who you want me to be. I can't be what I want to be for you." Kale stood up, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. She was right in some ways. He didn't fully understand the weight of what she carried, and perhaps he never would. But the one thing he did know, the one thing that had become clearer than ever, was that he didn't care about who she had been. He cared about who she was now. "You don't have to be perfect," Kale said softly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "You don't have to be anything other than what you are. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I just want you with me." She stood up then, her eyes filled with so much uncertainty, so much pain, and Kale felt his heart break all over again. She was so full of fear, so convinced that she couldn't belong in his world. And yet here she was, closer than she had been before, but still so far away. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can let go of the fear. What if I hurt you? What if—" "You won't," Kale interrupted, his voice gentle but filled with a quiet certainty. "You won't hurt me because I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. I don't need you to change. I just need you to be with me." The silence between them stretched on, and Kale could feel the weight of everything they had shared, everything they hadn't shared. The love he felt for her was more than he had ever known, but it was also filled with a deep, aching sadness. He didn't know if she could ever truly love him back, not in the way he wanted, not in the way that would heal the emptiness in her heart. But he also knew that what they had was real. And maybe that was enough. She finally took a step forward, slowly, her movements hesitant but filled with something Kale hadn't seen before: trust. Her hand reached out, and Kale felt his breath catch as she gently placed it on his chest, over his heart. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, her eyes filled with both hope and sorrow. "But I'm willing to try." Kale closed his eyes, his heart swelling as he gently cupped her face. "That's all I need," he whispered, leaning in slowly, giving her the space to decide. When their lips finally met, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was gentle, fragile even, as if they were both trying to hold on to something they weren't sure would stay. But it was enough. It was everything. For that one moment, nothing else mattered. The world could wait, the future could wait, because in that kiss they were exactly where they needed to be. And for the first time, Kale believed that they could find a way to face whatever came next. Not as two strangers from different worlds, but as two people, finally finding each other in the darkness. Days blurred into one another. The time Kale spent with her, whether in silence or soft conversation, felt like both a gift and a curse. Every moment spent together felt like it was on the edge of something too fragile to hold. She had allowed him into her world just a little, but every night there was that same pull of uncertainty, that same hesitation. Kale could feel it in the way she still kept a part of herself hidden, even when she was close. He didn't blame her for it, he understood. But it hurt, and that hurt made him question everything. She was no longer just a dream. She had become something real, something he could touch, hold, and feel. But in the back of his mind, he always wondered if she would ever truly let him in, if she could ever truly believe that someone like him could love someone like her. There were nights, too many nights, when he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling of his ship, wondering if he was chasing a shadow, something that could never be touched, something that would eventually slip through his fingers. And then there were the mornings when she would leave before dawn, disappearing into the forest without a word, without a trace, as though the world itself was too much for her to bear. Kale had tried to keep his distance, tried to give her the space she so desperately needed. But the distance between them was becoming unbearable. The love he felt for her was like an anchor, but it was also a weight. It held him down, kept him from moving forward, while she seemed to slip farther away with every passing day. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting the planet in golden light, Kale sat outside, his back against the cool hull of his ship. He had been thinking a lot lately, trying to figure out if this was something worth pursuing, if his love for her was something she would ever truly accept. Was he meant to be with her, or was this just a fleeting connection, one that would fade as quickly as it had come? And then she appeared. Her figure was a silhouette against the horizon, her steps slow but steady as she walked toward him. Cale's heart skipped at the sight of her, but there was a heaviness in his chest that hadn't been there before. She looked different tonight. Her usual grace was tempered with something darker, something that Cale could not ignore. He stood up, feeling the weight of his own thoughts pressing on him. "Hey," he said softly, his voice carrying in the still air. "You're here." She stopped a few feet from him, her eyes downcast, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she seemed to study him, as though deciding whether or not to say the words she had been holding back for so long. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quiet but firm, "thinking about us, about this, about everything." Cale's heart tightened. He felt the weight of her words, the finality in them. "What have you been thinking?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked up then, her golden eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know how to be with you when I'm still so broken. I don't know how to love someone when I've spent my whole life pushing everyone away." Cale took a slow step toward her, his hand reaching out, but she pulled back, the movement sharp and filled with a raw, untamed fear. "I can't promise you that I'll ever be what you want me to be," she continued, her voice trembling. "I can't be the person you think I am, I can't. Love you the way you deserve." His chest ached at her words. He wanted to tell her that it didn't matter, that he didn't need her to be perfect. He just wanted her. But the truth was, he could see it in her eyes. She was already pulling away. She was already slipping through his fingers, afraid of the very thing that had brought them together. She was afraid of love, afraid of what it meant to be loved. "Don't say that," Cale said, his voice hoarse. "You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be with me. We can take this one step at a time. We don't need to rush, we don't need to know everything. Just let me in. Let me help you heal." But she shook her head, the sadness in her eyes almost too much for Cale to bear. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not like you, I can't. I can't be the person you need me to be. I can't love you like you want me to. It's too much. I'm too much." Cale stepped forward again, his hand reaching out to her, but this time she didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered shut, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the warmth of his touch. It was the briefest of moments, but it was enough to break through the wall she had built around herself. "I don't care about what I need or what I want," Cale said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "I care about you. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be real, to let me in even if it's just a little. Please, don't walk away from me." She opened her eyes, her golden gaze filled with something, regret, fear, but also a flicker of something else. Hope. She took a deep breath and spoke softly, her voice trembling. "I wish I could be what you want me to be, Cale, I really do, but I can't. I'm too broken for this. I'm too broken for you." The finality in her words hit him harder than anything else. She wasn't just pulling away physically, she was pulling away emotionally, and there was nothing Cale could do to stop her. He wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, but he knew that it wouldn't change anything. She was afraid of what they could have, and no amount of pleading would change that. He stepped back, his chest aching with the weight of it. "Then maybe this is goodbye," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Maybe we were never meant to be." She didn't respond, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She turned away, her steps slow and heavy, and Cale watched her disappear into the darkness, the space between them growing wider with every step. And as he stood there in the silence of the night, Cale knew one thing for certain: he would never forget her. The love they had shared, fragile and fleeting as it was, would stay with him forever. And for the first time, he understood that sometimes love wasn't about being together. Sometimes, love was about letting go.